What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Healthspan Academy. I'm your host, Craig Shearhart, and joining me today is my special guest, Dr. Liza Egbogah. Liza started her academic career with a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacology from University of Alberta, and then completed her doctorate in chiropractic from CMCC in Toronto, and then went on to a really successful career, started a clinic in Toronto with manual therapy called The Fix in the clinic, and she also started a company called Dr. Liza's Shoes, which earned her an appearance on the Dragon's Den, which we're going to chat about today. And then kind of talk about sort of what she's been up to and all things related to footwear and chiropractic and how she helps people. Liza, so good to see you again.
So great to see you as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today. Yeah, for sure. So I want to start the chat with how all this began. Like, what first got you interested in chiropractic? I know you've also gone on to get an osteopathic certification. Talk about how that path sort of unraveled for you.
So I always knew I wanted to help people. So at the age of 6, I told everyone I'm going to be a doctor because I don't like seeing people in pain. So I want to help them get better. Cool. So that was at the age of 6.
Wow.
And then I went to University of Alberta for pharmacology with the plans to go to medical school after to be a medical doctor.
Yeah.
The first year in university, I volunteered at the hospital. So I was in the day ward. And that first day, I thought, my goodness, this is definitely not what I thought of as healthcare.
Yeah.
There was just such a feeling of illness and sickness. And it didn't seem like the goal was to improve the quality of life of people. It just is to stop them from dying and then send them on their way.
Yes.
And I thought, well, and I'm like, that's never the version of healthcare that I wanted.
Right.
So I started researching different disciplines. In my second year of university, I heard about chiropractic. So prior to that, I had never heard of chiropractic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it before. I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. So they're a doctor, they help people, but it's hands-on. So I was curious. I decided to get a summer job at a chiropractor's office. And, people would come in, they weren't in the best of mood, but then I would hear laughing from the treatment rooms and patients would leave. And all of a sudden they were happier. And I thought, okay, that sounds good. Like,
what a wild concept.
Exactly. I mean, and it wasn't long. Like, they were in there for maybe 15 minutes and then they would come out and they just, their whole faces changed.
Right.
So I went to the chiropractor, like, I don't know what you're doing in there, but, I would like to see what chiropractic is about. So do you mind doing a treatment for me?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, do you have any issues? I said, well, I have knee problems, but, it's because I used to run track. I did hurdles. And my doctor just said that it was growing pain. So there's nothing you can do about that, but you could just try. And he's like, no. And so he assessed my gait and said, oh, well, you are an overpronator. You just need custom orthotics and you'll be fine. I was like, okay. I mean, how is an insert in my shoe going to change the knee pain that I've been suffering from since I was a kid? So he made me a pair of custom orthotics and that was it. After a couple of weeks, I was able to run without knee pain.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. Someone comes in with a problem. We're not just treating the symptoms. We're looking at the root cause of the problem and then providing an actual solution for them so that they can be functional. Because for me, if you have pain moving, then you're not going to have a great quality of life.
For sure.
And so that's when I decided I wanted to be a chiropractor.
That's amazing. Sweet.
Yeah.
We met around that time. And since then you started the clinic. So, and then when did the osteopathic kind of career come into place?
So I heard about it first a couple of years into practice because an osteopath from France actually reached out to me and said that he was coming to Canada and he'd like to work at my clinic. And again, at that time, I had never heard of an osteopath.
Right.
And so he was great. And I found that the way that he practiced was quite similar to the way that I practiced. So rather than just focusing on adjustments, he did a lot of, myofascial release.
Right.
He looked at the fascia and I thought, well, this is how I practice because it was always confusing for patients when they would refer other patients to me Because they're like, well, she's a chiropractor, but kind of like massage physio, like chiro massage physio. Like, what is the name for that?
Yeah.
And because most people have this conception that chiropractors mostly focus on adjustments along the spine.
Right.
And for me, that was probably only about 10% of my visit.
Right.
Most of it was actually myofascial relief, because I found that's what gave people the long-term changes that we were looking for in their function. So he's the one who got me, opened my eyes to osteopathy. And then a couple of years later, I thought, you know what? Since that is how I'm practicing, I might as well get the designation as well. And because I was already a chiropractor, it was an easy program to bridge. Cool. And so I went to osteopathy school and I got my designation in 2017.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I've had incredible experience with both chiros and osteopaths. I like the kind of holistic approach to things. And I think obviously it's dependent person to person,
head
right?
to toe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and every practitioner is different, but I always look at the body as a whole, that you cannot separate it into parts.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we got to get into this Dragon's Den conversation. I watched the episode. That was super cool. I was like, man, I know this girl. So that was really cool to watch. Talk about sort of what led into that, how you sort of started the shoe interests. I know you've been interested in fashion for a long time, and I'm curious to hear your perspective, having that biomechanics background too. How that all sort of unfold.
So interestingly enough, I mean, the reason that I got into chiropractic was because of my own problems with my gait that caused the knee pain. Yeah. So I always thought that what you do with your feet makes a huge difference on your body. So therefore, our footwear and what we wear is critical in order to function properly.
For sure.
And I've always been into fashion. I love fashion. And when I started out in practice, I was wearing the ugliest shoes because I am on my feet all day and comfort came first. So I had to wear shoes that were comfortable and supportive because again, if I'm not wearing supportive shoes because of my overpronation, then I'm going to end up with knee pain. And it's hard to practice when you're doing a physical job when you have knee pain.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it was in 2015, one of my patients who was a design director at the Bay came in and said, Dr. Liza, you are going to be the one who's going to create a women's high heel that us fashion girls can actually wear.
Amazing.
She's like, since you can't, you can't recommend any because you would never recommend ugly shoes to me. I'm like, yes, no. So,
I love that.
And so that's what got the ball turning. Cool. I already knew about the biomechanics, custom orthotics, modifying orthopedic footwear. So what I had to learn was just actually how to design a shoe, so the anatomy of a shoe. So I took some classes to learn how to actually design a shoe. And that's how it all started. And I launched in 2017.
Wow, that's super cool. And so what were the surprises in the show? Like, talk a little bit about the experience. Was it did it go as expected? I know it was probably a little, I don't know if they did it for the purpose of TV, but like it seems like they always choose the person that's going to accept you last. Like, what were the highlights, or what's the most memorable thing about being on it for you?
Well, I mean, it was great to actually make it into the den and have my episode air. Yeah. I wasn't that nervous. I know a lot of people are nervous going in, but on Bay Street, the Dragons are literally the kind of patients I've treated for over a decade. So those are the people that I'm used to dealing with.
Cool.
But
you did look pretty calm and cool and collective.
Yeah, because I'm like, these are the people who I've been working on and helping for the last decade. Yeah. So they actually edited a bit. So the dragon who accepts it at the end, it wasn't actually in that order. So they actually modify the order so that it works for TV, because it would never work. It would never work that way.
Fair enough.
And I had actually accepted her offer before hearing all the dragons.
Okay, interesting.
My strategy going in is, as soon as anyone makes an offer, I accept the offer on the spot without negotiation. So that was my strategy going into the den. So that's what I did.
Amazing. Well, it seems like it panned out pretty well. That's awesome. So you kind of alluded to the foot mechanics and assessment and kind of balancing the fashion versus the mechanics. Let's talk a little bit about what are the problems with wearing high heels? How does that impact the low back, the typical heel? You talk about pronation. So in a typical shoe, what are the issues that need to be resolved?
Well, so in a high heel, and when we think about your average high heel, we think about a stiletto heel. So the first issue you have is a balance issue.
Mm-hmm.
You're balancing on this little small circumference,
Yeah.
and that causes instability.
Mm-hmm.
So with that instability, you have higher incidence of ankle sprains,
Mm-hmm.
knee injuries, and especially with women because of the way that our posture and angles are. We have angles that make us more prone to our knees going in, or what we call genu valgum. So heels just accentuate that, especially with stilettos.
Right.
And then you have this issue where you are being tilted forward
Mm-hmm.
because of the pitch of the shoe.
Yeah.
And that causes an anterior pelvic tilt,
Mm-hmm.
which then causes strain on the lower back.
Right.
So most women who think of uncomfortable high heels are thinking just of the consequences with their feet. So things like bunions from having a narrow toe box.
Mm-hmm.
They think about hammer toes because of that compression.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't realize is that their entire chain is actually changing because of the way that they're walking their heels.
Right.
Because that's what our bodies do. They compensate for our actions. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are wearing something, your body's like, okay, what can I do to alter myself in order to minimize the impact of all this damage that you're trying to cause me?
Yeah.
But while it's making these compensations, it's creating further damage because the body just thinks, my goal is to help you survive, run away from the tiger or lion. It's not about whether you're in pain. So that's where all these compensations come from. So that was the biggest problem with heels are the foot injuries, the knee injuries, ankles, foot, and back.
Yeah, it just seems like the worst possible comment. You're decreasing the size of the heel contact, so it's higher pressure, smaller base of support. You're on the toes, you're overstraining the patellar tendon. It's just this cascade effect. So
absolutely, you cause shortening of the
you're scrunching the toes in this small little box in the front, so you're like your toes don't have room to breathe. It just seems like the worst possible scenario, but for whatever reason, we see them as these beautiful things. So talk about those compromises you started to make the shoe still function as well as possible while still handling the aesthetic piece.
Okay, so the first thing I did was I tried, the thing is a stiletto looks great. We can't deny that a stiletto looks great. Yeah. It's elongating.
Fabulous.
Women look better. Exactly. Yeah. And the height makes you look better.
Right.
So I wanted to calculate the maximum amount of height that I could get without compromising the posture. So in order to do that, I worked on a 3.75 inch heel and then went with the smallest diameter possible where we could actually maintain full balance. And then to make up for the pitch, I included a platform.
Okay, cool.
But it wasn't just a regular platform. You know, the EVA material that you have in running shoes that gives you shock absorption?
Right.
So that's what I used for the platform. So that way you get the minimized impact on the base of your toes.
Oh, that's super
smart. And then putting in an orthotic insole that helps support the arch so that you're not rolling in and you're not as balanced forward because it's holding your foot in a supportive position and then cushioning throughout. And I think the key thing is just getting that perfect diameter for the heel, getting the platform and the orthotic insole. And then the other thing I wanted to do was to create a rocking motion. So, a lot of times when people have severe plantar fasciitis or metatarsalgia, issues with their
it's more
foot.
Abrasive kind of hit and then hit. You want it to be more smooth. Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the things that I was doing in practice before was recommending a rocker sole shoe.
Cool.
So that was what was challenging when I was first trying to find someone to make my shoe for me, is I was trying to get this full rocker motion. And people are like, you can't do that in a heel. And I was like, we're going to do it. I'm going to do it.
I'm going to make this happen. Watch me.
So like, in order to get the rocker motion, you just have to have the actual platform incline up so that you can get that rocker motion. That's really all it takes. So if you can have a platform, you can create that rocker motion.
That's amazing.
And then I use the same 3D gait analysis that I use in my clinic in order to actually test the shoes.
Cool.
So what I wanted to see is that there were no pressure points, that it was correcting for overpronation, and that we're getting a nice, good gait profile.
That's amazing. So this is where I'm in danger of geeking out because I worked for a couple of years in a gait lab. So talk to me about your setup. Was it a full kinematic analysis? Like what were the variables you looked at sort of optimizing?
Well, so it was quite actually very basic. There were only two things I was looking at. So for most patients, especially nowadays with our modern culture, spending too much time sitting, most people at this point are actually overpronators.
Right.
Right. So that's the first thing that I wanted to correct for. And that's the thing I was looking for, is whether it corrects for that overpronation.
So you just put markers to check for rotation in the foot.
Exactly. Yeah. And but when you're wearing the shoe, and so checking I use about 50 clinical samples. And so the first is with them barefoot, and then them walking on the gait plate with the actual heel on. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is, when you are looking at the gait, you can see how much pressure they're putting at the base of the metatarsals. So in a typical high heel, or in so many people who are overpronators or have shortened calves, you're going to see that there's increased pressure there.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to see that there were no pressure points there. So those were the two main things: correct for overpronation and no pressure points at the base of the metatarsal.
Very cool. So you were using...
It has to be general, right? Because this is for the general public. They're not custom shoes.
Yeah, totally fair. So you basically use the barefoot. You wanted to optimize as close to the barefoot as you could by kind of looking at what was changing when you put a shoe on. Is that the gist?
Well, the optimal barefoot, right? Because most people have poor biomechanics, right? So I wanted to correct those biomechanics.
Right.
So the same kind of corrections that I would want to see with when I'm making a custom orthotic, those are the same corrections that I wanted to see with my shoe.
Amazing. That is super cool.
Yeah, so it's a therapeutic device as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I love it. And it looked great. People bought in. So that's such a cool story. I love hearing that. I know you've kind of shifted into running shoes a little bit, and this is like such a flooded market. And I think it's sometimes hard to figure. It's easy to get lost in the marketing around shoes and whether we should go flat foot or whether we need a cushioned heel. And I feel like, and there's a lot of user specificity. What is your take on helping someone find the ideal running shoe?
Well, so I am against the whole barefoot science, and I'll just explain why.
Sure.
So optimally, when we think about barefoot science, we are thinking of a population, like an ideal population, where the surface that we're on is a shock absorbing surface, because that's what our bodies were designed to be on. We're designed to be on soil, grass, all the surfaces that humans were designed to be on are shock absorbing surfaces.
Yeah,
now,
we didn't have concrete 10,000 years ago, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And now what we've gone ahead and done is we've covered everything in concrete.
Yeah.
And most people think this is just, when I go outside, that's the only time. But when I'm at home, it's fine. But your living surface, what is under your floor? It's also concrete.
Right.
So you are thinking that, yes, I can be barefoot because that's best, but you are not barefoot on soil. You're not barefoot on grass. You're not barefoot on sand. You're barefoot on a substance that our bodies were not designed to be barefoot on. It doesn't work with our biomechanics.
Right.
So that's the first point. And then second, we as a society, we've completely changed our posture. So most people have actually changed so that their pelvises are tilted, so that they are rolling in more, right? Because we spend too much time sitting. We were never meant to just be sitting in chairs the way we were doing. We're supposed to be sitting in a squatted position, right? So if you're sitting in a squatted position, your glute meats are strong, they're firing, they're stabilizing you, and you're walking on a great natural material, then barefoot's fine. And that's why you see that people in the villages in Africa, they can wear those very minimal, they're almost like paper type of sandals and be perfectly fine. But you have to think of what they're walking on. They're walking on that red soil. Yeah. When they're sitting, they're not sitting on the type of chairs that we're sitting on.
Yeah.
If you watch them, they're almost in a squatted position, or when they go down to sit, it's like they're doing a pelvic tilt and then sitting, so that they're in a lower squatted position.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how they use the bathroom. That's how they sit. They don't sleep on our cushiony foam mattresses. Yeah. They're literally sleeping on a mat on the soil.
You even see
right?
that
So
with kids, right? Like that's just, it's in our DNA to be like that. It's just like, we're so conditioned to sit on chairs. Like I love the images you
kids
see.
will
Like,
naturally go into a squat.
yeah.
Like if you watch a kid, because I have a,
yeah, you don't have to teach them anything. They just like, just drop. And they're like, oh, there's nothing for me to correct. It's just, it blows your mind as a coach. Just like, man, their knees are in line with their toes. They're perfectly neutral spine. It's just like, wow, how do you, and then we're just undoing that with all the other habits.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And it's so crazy to see how like, they'll just naturally when they're moving around, they're going into lunges, they're going into squats. And that's just how they move around. And then we put them in these rigid desks all day. Right. Mm-hmm. And then essentially beat that out of them. Right.
Yeah. That's wild. So basically, so you're not pro kind of barefoot. The cushion heel,
unless
I feel like
you're in the right circumstances. Right?
Yeah. So talk about that user specificity. I think like one of the other things that I've taken from it is we don't want any drastic change. Like if you're used to a heel, don't go to no heel. If you're used to no heel, don't go to a massive heel. So how do you find someone's starting point when you start to find the right shoe for them?
Well, in general, I find most people need a little bit of shock absorption, and that's just to compensate for the ground, right? I find most people need some midsole stability because most are overpronators, and those are really only the two basics that I can say are universal for most people. And we have to be careful though when we talk about having cushioning, because when you have too much cushioning, what you have are people actually sinking in. It's like walking on pillows. And that actually increases overpronation. Yeah. So those super foamy, super cushiony shoes, like if someone says that their running shoes feel like pillows, that's a red flag to me. Yeah. Right. So you just want enough so that you compensate for the material that we walk on, the concrete. And then you want some midsole stability. So not like an overcorrective arch support. You know, if someone has something that they need that kind of correction for, I usually recommend a custom orthotic. But for the general population, we don't want to force their foot into a position that is not natural for them. And that's why something springy and flexible that just works with their natural arches. Because if you put someone who has pes planus or flat feet in a big arch support shoe that's rigid, they're going to be in more pain because that's not their natural biomechanics. Not everyone has the same arches.
It's kind of like a Band-Aid solution. So let's get into that a little bit. So you hear different schools of thought with orthotics, and I feel like just the nature of the industry, I think they are somewhat over-prescribed to some people and maybe misprescribed. I think like finding that balance between, is this going to correct your issue and also weaken your hips or other issues that mechanically you could kind of fix naturally? Like how do you decide whether an orthotic is the right path? And when you're sort of talking someone through that process?
Well, so for most people, I find what's more important than an actual orthotic is having the right shoe. Yeah. Right? Because it doesn't matter what great orthotic you have. If you don't have the right shoe, then it's useless. So usually I will go to getting the right shoe first before an orthotic. And the people who need orthotics are usually people who suffered some kind of injury. Right. So you have people who might have had a fracture in childhood, or they might have fallen off a horse or been in a car accident or had some kind of trauma that has now drastically altered the left and the right side. Right. So when people have a drastic difference between the left and the right, that's when I recommend custom orthotic. Right. If they don't have any of those issues, usually I just recommend getting good shoes more than anything. Yeah.
And it's crazy how much what you're doing in the hips just impacts that arch. I remember taking this mobility course like almost 10 years ago now. And the guy was a doctor in physical therapy. And so show me somebody with flat feet. And he was like, okay, now externally rotate your hips. And like, oh, there's all of a sudden an arch. Like, so it's really cool, that relationship. Obviously it's not a Band-Aid universal for everybody, but it's just, I think it's wild that those solutions are out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the hip thing is huge for our gait, right? And that's why most people have altered gait, is because their hips have changed from too much time sitting. Yeah. So if you can work on the hips first, that's the first go-to.
Yeah. And it's just interesting how the hips can be the root issue or the symptom. And then it's like this back and forth. It's just a snowball when your feet are having problems, your hips have problems, and it's just more, but then all of a sudden you're like out of alignment and you're having nerve issues down with feet. So it's
exactly. It's like a chicken egg. Like
yeah.
which came first? Was it the foot issues that caused the hip issues, or was it the hip issues that caused the foot issues?
Yeah.
I'm finding for most people now, though, it's the hip issues as a result of our lifestyle that is leading to the foot issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably a fair assessment too. Let's talk a little bit about the clinic and your mission there and some of the issues that you see commonly. What are typical things that you'll see if people walk into the clinic? Is it just general back pain, or what is the common thread you think that you see?
Well, for me, because I do have a special interest in the feet, I do see a lot of people who obviously come to me to work on their feet. And that's why most of the times when those people are coming to see me for their feet, I end up at the hips and find, okay, that's what's causing your, and that's why you haven't had success in the past, is because people have just been addressing your feet when really we needed to be looking at your whole body.
I love when those lights start to go off and like, oh, my foot hurts. And you start like, what are you looking at my hip for? I'm like, oh,
that's it. That's what did it.
Yeah.
And then of course I see a lot of back pain because again, if you have tight hip flexors, which attach to your lumbar spine, you're going to have back pain. And then a lot of neck and shoulder issues.
Yeah.
But I would say the biggest thing when I'm looking at the root cause of a patient's problem, a lot of times it goes back to the psoas. Yeah. Right. And the interesting part about the psoas is how many people don't realize that their whole posture has changed because of it. The fascia that we have at the psoas, it actually shares the same sheet with your pec. So when that fascia gets shortened or you have knots in it, it actually just curls everything in.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah. So a lot of times,
yeah,
a lot of times when people have neck and shoulder problems and they're like, why are you at my hip? I'm like, I could actually release your hip flexors right now and not touch your shoulders, and your shoulders would feel better.
That's cool.
And that's why over time, anyone who has a long-standing hip issue will have a shoulder issue. Anyone who has a long-standing shoulder issue will have a hip issue. Yeah. It's literally one sheet of fascia between your hip flexors and your pec. So if those guys are tight, it's going to roll you into a C and then alter your entire posture.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You mentioned like shoulders and traps. So have you noticed a shift in how things have looked throughout the pandemic now that people are stressed? You notice people are just carrying stress in different spots or it's expressing itself differently? Has it changed what you've seen clinically?
You know what? At the beginning, earlier in the pandemic, I was seeing a lot of issues with feet and with knees. And it's because people were going barefoot more than they ever had. That was the biggest issue I saw right off the bat. Huh. And then a little bit later on, it started to be more issues with people's hands.
Right.
And a lot of that was due to hobbies they've taken out, because most hobbies, whether it was making bread at the beginning of the pandemic or knitting or art or even riding your bike where people are gripping and they're not used to it, then I saw a lot of hand issues. And now what I'm seeing, now that we're almost 2 years in, is people are just falling apart from head to toe.
Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah. So
hopefully the worst is over and we're on our way back and we can
get back to some kind of normal. I don't feel that. I feel like we're going to be in this.
I'm just trying to stay optimistic. I'm going to keep lying to myself and saying we're going to get better soon.
It's almost over.
Yeah.
At least summer will be okay.
Yeah. Liza, let's talk a little bit about your personal habits. And being in a pandemic, we're all kind of limited. We can't get to gyms the way we want to, and I feel like everyone's baseline stress is a little bit higher. Where do your priorities land with your own personal health, wellness, fitness right now? What do your habits look like around that stuff?
Well, I mean, for myself, and this has always been my thing, is to minimize stress. Because once you are dealing with stress, you're dealing with inflammation. And given that I have a physical job, that's not something that I can work through if I'm dealing with inflammation. So my number two, these are the main two things that I do every day. One is dancing.
Oh, cool.
So dancing is actually one of the best ways to release tension from your body and reduce stress.
Yeah, it's impossible to be mad when you're dancing.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of traditional medicine and different tribal practices include dancing as part of the medicine.
I love that.
Right? And a lot of dancing focuses on opening up the hips. So dancing And then stretching. So I'm a big stretcher, and not just passive stretching. Every stretch I do is essentially a yoga pose where I'm contracting and stretching at the same time.
Cool.
So I have about 5 yoga postures that I do every day.
Nice.
And those all help to improve my posture, release tension, balance me, and also strengthen my core because I'm on my feet all day. So there's number 2. And then I have my, of course, make sure you drink enough water. I've been taking vitamin D and vitamin C religiously during the pandemic. We do need to take our vitamin D, especially if we're not outside as much.
For sure.
And then trying to get outside when I can.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's going and playing in the snow with my son, or going for a walk when I can, just being outside, enjoying the fresh air, spending some time with nature. Because when we're disconnected from nature, that actually can increase stress, it can increase inflammation, and we just don't feel as good. And our mental health is so important. And our posture is associated with our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, posture is my biggest thing. So those stretches, the yoga poses, the dancing, the being outside, it's all for mental health, physical well-being, and posture.
I love that. Yeah, obviously you can't pour from an empty cup. Your people rely on you being your best when you see them. So it sounds like amazing habits. That's cool. Well, it sounds like you've done amazing for yourself. What's the best way to people to get in touch or book in with your clinic or learn more from you, Liza?
So I have a website, so dr-liza.com, or anywhere on social media, and Dr. Liza. So you can find me by just Googling Dr. Liza, really.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. Well, it's so great catching up. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, stay in touch.
No, for sure. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Healthspan Academy, and we'll see you next time.